All right, UPSC folks, welcome back. You know the drill. Another deep dive coming at you. And today we're tackling something that's, I think, really going to come in handy for your mains prep,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you think about things like federalism, education policy, and how all that mixes with the sociocultural dynamics in India.
Absolutely.
Who knows, maybe even something for prelims, too.
Oh, for sure.
So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and as always, hit us up in the comments with any questions you've got.
Yeah, we love hearing from you guys.
Okay, so for today's deep dive, we're pulling from some recent articles in The Hindu and IT, and we're going to be talking about Tamil Nadu's, that whole thing with them and the three-language policy. It's back in the news again. Thanks to F 2020, it's a pretty complex issue with quite a history, and we're going to break it all down for you.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. It's not just like a policy debate or something. It's like a window into this like deep-seated cultural anxiety and, this history of resistance.
Oh, yeah, for sure. To get everyone up to speed, the big news is that the central government is holding back a whole lot of funding from Tamil Nadu.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking 2,152 crores from the Samita Krishna program. And that's the program meant to make sure everyone's getting a good education.
Right, crucial stuff.
And why are they doing this? Well, because the Tamil Nadu is saying nope to the three-language formula that's laid out in NEP 2020. So it's like this classic center-state standoff. Tamil Nadu is sticking to their two-language system, and the center's pushing for three.
Exactly. And to really get this clash, you got to go back in time a little bit and understand how this three-language policy has evolved over the years. I mean, it was first introduced way back in 1968, but NEP 2020, it takes a more flexible approach.
Okay.
Unlike that old policy, NEP 2020, it doesn't say, okay, Hindi has to be taught everywhere, It lets states, regions, even individual students choose their three languages, as long as at least two of them are native to India.
So if NEP 2020 isn't forcing Hindi on non-Hindi speaking states, then why is Tamil Nadu so against it? It seems, I don't know, a little extreme.
Well, it's a little more complicated than it looks on the surface. See, while NEP 2020 might not come right out and say you have to learn Hindi, Tamil Nadu sees it as this kind of sneaky way of imposing the language anyway. They say that because of practical things like a lack of resources or qualified teachers for every single language out there, Hindi's probably going to end up being the default third language for a lot of students.
That's a good point. It's not just about what the policy says on paper, it's about what could actually happen. But why is Tamil Nadu so sensitive about this whole thing? Wouldn't encouraging people to be multilingual be a good thing?
Well, to get that, you really have to dive into their history. We're talking about a state with a long history and sometimes a really intense history of resisting anything that feels like they're being forced to use Hindi. It's part of their cultural and political identity.
Okay, so time for a little history lesson then, right? We know Tamil Nadu's been pushing back against this for a long time, even before India became independent.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Think about this. It's 1937. And the Justice Party, they're leading these lot of protests against the Madras government because the government tried to make Hindi a required subject in schools.
Wow.
These protests were so big that people died.
Really?
The policy ended up getting dropped, but that whole thing, it left this scar, and it fueled this resentment towards any attempt to force Hindi on them.
Yeah, I could see that.
Then fast forward to 1965, the idea of making Hindi the only official language of India, well, that sparked another wave of protests. And this time, it got violent. I mean, really violent, tragic loss of life.
Wow, I had no idea. It really shows how deeply people in Tamil Nadu feel about this. It's not just about language. It's about identity and culture and, being able to make their own choices.
Exactly, and those feelings, they just got stronger in 1968. When the DMK government led by C.N. Annadurai, they flat out rejected the three-language formula that was being proposed nationally. They put in place a two-language policy for Tamil Nadu, Tamil and English, and every government in the state since then has fought hard to keep that policy.
So basically, any attempt to bring Hindi into Tamil Nadu is going to be met with some serious resistance. I guess that's the legacy of all those historical events we were just talking about. Does Tamil Nadu feel like history's repeating itself with this whole NEP 2020 thing?
Oh, yeah, they see the parallels. Remember in 2019, when a draft of the NEP came out and it said everyone has to learn Hindi, there was this huge outcry from Tamil Nadu, and they ended up dropping that part of the proposal. The state is really committed to this two-language system.
It's clear that this is way more than just a disagreement about policy. It's tapping into this deep fear of losing something really important. And it's not just ancient history either. It's still shaping things today. But what about the central government? What are they doing that might be, I don't know, adding to these anxieties?
Well, some of their actions have kind of unintentionally made things worse. Like, Let me give you an example. Back in 2019, the central government set aside 50 rupee a crore specifically for hiring Hindi teachers in states that don't speak Hindi as their main language.
Hmm.
That move kind of raised some eyebrows in Tamil Nadu. A lot of people saw it as yet another sign that Hindi was being pushed, even if it wasn't like directly stated.
Right. So even if the NEP doesn't say learn Hindi outright, things like that specific funding allocation make people nervous. And I guess it plays into that whole narrative of Hindi imposition that they've been dealing with for so long. It's like they're not saying you have to, but they're making it a lot easier to choose Hindi.
Exactly. And Tamil Nadu, they point out that there's not really any similar effort to promote South Indian languages in schools up north, or even in the central government schools like the Kendriya Vidyalaya. So they see this imbalance, and it just adds to their concerns.
Yeah, that makes sense. It brings us to Tamil Nadu's side of things. What are their main concerns? And how do they justify sticking with this two-language policy?
Well, their biggest worry is that promoting Hindi is going to mean hurting Tamil language and culture. For them, language isn't just about communicating. It's central to their identity. It holds their history, their traditions. They're very protective of it.
I see. So it's about protecting their way of life, their unique culture.
Exactly. And it's not just fear either. Tamil Nadu says, look, our two-language policy has been working. They point to good enrollment rates and low dropout rates as proof that their system is doing what it's supposed to. They're saying, why add a third language and mess things up when what we have is already working?
So they don't want to fix something that isn't broken. It seems like we've got this clash of ideas. On one hand, national unity and having a shared language, and on the other, protecting regional identity and having control over your own choices. With such strong opinions on both sides, how do we even start to find a solution? What's the next step?
The way forward has got to start with open and honest conversations, being willing to listen to each other and understand where the other side's coming from. And a real effort to compromise cooperative federalism is key, especially when it comes to something like education policy. We have to move past these rigid stances and accept that India is a huge and complex country with a lot of different languages. It's like imagine trying to force one language on a place as diverse as the European Union. It wouldn't work, would it?
No, it wouldn't. And you're right, India's linguistic diversity is a strength, not a weakness. It makes our culture and heritage richer. But we can't ignore the fact that the central government is holding back important funding for the Samagra Shiksha program in Tamil Nadu. That's a serious issue. It could really impact the education of millions of children.
You're absolutely right. Punishing a state by taking away funding for education because of disagreements over language policy just doesn't make sense. In the end, it's the students who suffer, and they're the future of the country. This whole situation needs a solution, and it needs it fast. A solution that's fair and takes everyone's needs into account.
This is such a complicated issue. It makes you think about the balance of power between the central government and the states, the role of language in creating a national identity, and how to find solutions that respect the diversity of India. What are your thoughts on how this will all play out in the long run? Do you think other states might follow Tamil Nadu's lead and start pushing back against policies they don't agree with?
That's a big question, and I think
Great.
that's a big question, and I think it really highlights those challenges of federalism we see in India. That constant back and forth between the center and the states, and things like a language policy, they can become these like flashpoints in that ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if Tamil Nadu doing this, if it gives other states the idea to, assert their own autonomy a bit more and push back against policies that they don't like.
It is fascinating to see how something like language policy can connect to so many bigger things, like federalism, cultural identity, educational rights, even political strategy. What does all this mean for our listeners, especially those of you prepping for the UPSC exams?
Well, I think this deep dive has given you a good foundation to understand and analyze this issue. Remember the UPSC, they're not just looking for you to memorize facts. They want people who can think critically, connect the dots, see the big picture.
Right.
So when you're studying this, think about the historical context, the details of the policies, the arguments on both sides. What are the implications for national unity, social cohesion, educational equity?
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, all the stuff we talked about today, it's based on reports from the Hindu and IT. We really encourage you to dig into those sources yourselves, form your own opinions, and don't forget, the comment section's there for a reason. Share your thoughts, your questions. Anything you learned, we'd love to see it.
Yeah, the more discussion, the better.
And that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But keep thinking about this. What are the long-term consequences of this whole standoff? How can India balance that desire for a unified national identity with the need to protect and celebrate all of its amazing linguistic and cultural diversity? Keep those brains working, and we'll see you out on our next deep dive. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more UPSC-focused discussions. And until then, happy studying.